You're scrolling, and before you've even finished reading the sentence, some part of you has already decided whose side it's on. A stranger says one thing, and you sort them, instantly, into an ally or a threat. You didn't choose to do that. It just happened the way your hand flinches from a spark. You call this a flaw. You promise yourself you'll be more open, more global, more understanding of the other side. The world is smaller now. You can see everyone. And then the next post loads, and you do it again. It isn't only politics. You feel a version of the same pull in a rival team's colors, a different accent, a different flag at a border crossing. Here's the part nobody tells you. That reflex isn't something cable news or Twitter installed in you last decade. It's older than nations, older than writing, older than the wheel. And the reason it still runs your thumb is buried in the gap between how your ancestors lived and how a handful of screens quietly decided you should. For nearly the whole of human history, something like 300,000 years, your group meant the same 40, 80, maybe 150 faces you saw almost every day. You knew their voices, their limps, who'd shared meat with you last winter. Then came farming, then cities, then nations built from millions of people you would never meet or smell or share a fire with. And finally the internet, which did something no rule change before it had managed. It shrank the group down to a symbol you could recognize in half a second. A flag, a color, a logo, a hashtag. The tribe used to be a face across a fire. Now it's an icon in the corner of a screen. And nobody has told your brain the difference. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar looked at the size of the neocortex, the part of the brain built for tracking relationships, and used it to estimate how many people a human mind can hold as genuinely known, a number somewhere around 150. Honesty matters here, because this is exactly where the internet overpromises. That number gets repeated online like a law of physics, and it isn't one. Later researchers, re-examining Dunbar's own data, found the real range swings wildly, anywhere from a few dozen to several hundred, with no single figure holding up under scrutiny. What does hold up is the underlying shape of it. Your brain was built for a small, known circle, not for 8 billion strangers. In 2001, the psychologists Robert Kurzban, John Tooby, and Leda Cosmides ran an experiment built to test this directly. They expected the obvious result, that people sort each other by race, automatically, the way decades of research said they would. But when they added a second cue, a colored team jersey that crossed race lines, the race-based sorting nearly disappeared. People started sorting by jersey instead. Their conclusion, race itself was never the trigger. Coalition was, your mind isn't built to detect skin or accent or flag. It's built to detect alliance, and it will use whatever marker is cheapest and most visible to do it. A jersey works exactly as well as a face. And it's worth being fair to this system before we go further. The same wiring that sorts strangers into threats is the wiring that makes you show up for the people in your circle. That isn't a design flaw, that's cooperation, and it kept small groups of humans alive for 300,000 years. The problem was never that you have a coalition instinct. The problem is what happens when that instinct meets a world built to trigger it constantly for profit. In 2017, the psychologist William Brady and his colleagues at NYU studied nearly 1 million tweets and found that adding a single moral or emotional word to a post, words like attack, shame, destroy, raised its odds of being shared by about 20%. And that boost was largest of all when the words were aimed at the other side, not your own. A year later, MIT researchers led by Soroush Vosoughi traced 126,000 news cascades across Twitter and found that false stories spread roughly 6 times faster than true ones, and were 70% more likely to be shared. False political stories spread fastest of all. Nobody had to design a machine to make you angrier at your neighbor. They only had to notice that anger travels and build a feed that gets out of its way. And here's the honest, uncomfortable finding. You'd expect the fix to be simple. Just show people the other side. In 2018, the sociologist Christopher Bale and his team at Duke paid Republicans and Democrats to follow bot accounts that fed them the opposing side's views for a month. It didn't open anyone up. The Republicans in the study came back measurably more conservative. More exposure didn't build a bridge. On this kind of feed, it built a wall. Honesty matters here too. The same backfire didn't show up as clearly on the Democrats in that study, so this isn't a tidy, symmetrical story. But the core warning holds. On a feed built for engagement, simply seeing more of the other side is not the antidote it sounds like. The alarm that once kept 40 people alive around a fire is now wired straight into a feed built to profit from it ringing. None of this makes the pull toward your side a moral failing. It makes it a 300,000-year-old alliance system, doing the only job it has ever known, in a world that finally handed it too many flags to track. You are not closed-minded. You are a very old animal, standing in front of a fire that got far bigger than it was ever meant to be, doing what you've always done, working out who's safe to stand beside. The circle was never the enemy. It just forgot, a long time ago, how small it was built to be. This is a video about psychology and history, not a verdict on any political side. The tribal alarm fires in every direction, for everyone, and understanding it isn't the same as excusing what it makes you do.